Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this episode, I go over some quick reviews over the month of March. Now, this month was my most prolific month yet with board gaming, at least on record, looking back on logged plays on Board Game Geek. Some of that has to do with it being my birthday month, and I decided to play all of my favorite big box Uwe Rosenberg games at least once this month. This was really fun, and I really enjoyed revisiting some of my favorites that I can't get to the table easily or play online. It was a reminder of how much I enjoy these titles and for what comes to mind of Rosenberg games, whether these are big or small. It was a cozy thing to return to, and I really enjoyed it. And speaking of small, a big portion of these games that I've logged are due to Applejack. And I played Applejack a lot this month. I've been toying around with the idea of how to define myself as a board gamer and content creator. I do all of this for fun and don't want to make content creation seem like a chore. It's a part of how I enjoy this hobby. You know, some people just play board games and that's fine. Some people blog about it. I'd like to make audio-visual content now because it helps me really reflect about the games that I have been playing, both new and old, and really dive deeper into the hobby. And so, one thing that I've mentioned before is that in addition to trying out new games, and I will obviously continue to try out latest new games and everything, but I'm really fascinated about the process of becoming really adept at a game, diving into strategies that involve high-level play and what a board game feels like when you're playing it at such a level. So I decided to become a good player at Rosenberg games in particular to start, since I love them so much, and to prove it, I want to be highly ranked on Board Game Arena in particular with these games. I'm thinking about how to log my journey to becoming the most prolific and best player of Rosenberg games, which is quite a feat, thinking about some of the harder games to master, such as Agricola. But I want to start my journey at least by starting with Applejack, which I think is a good ease into this process of becoming a masterful gamer, since it's somewhat easy to learn, and the strategy of playing it well, as I've come to learn so far in 1 month of heavy playing, it's not too much of a leap to go from a beginner to intermediate and advanced player. There are things that I need to learn, but I'm really excited to dive deeper into this game, Applejack, as well as Rosenberg games as a whole, and hope to find something that is enjoyable for you to listen or to view along the way. Needless to say, I've started to become more enamored by Applejack, just to mention a few thoughts. It is easy enough to teach, like I mentioned, but I still stand by what I went into a few months back, or about a year or so ago, when I did my review on Applejack, due to the fact that despite the ease of learning this game, the playing of the game might be a little fiddly, as some say, where the calculating of scores, not only at the end of the game, but also during the game as you pass the pawn through the orchard and gather honey tokens as you go along. It is quite mathematical, and it is more involved and fiddly than other games are in the Rosenberg repertoire, but also elsewhere. And so I'm starting to see how this game is really fun, though, if you start to have the computer, take care of that and really start to take all of that mathematical computation out of the way and just focus in on the gameplay. It starts to really feel more enriched. And so I'm really excited to continue playing this game. Now, with that out of the way, that's kind of more of my blog personal thoughts moment. I want to get into some reviews about some of the games that didn't quite make my criteria for wanting to make a full video on, and perhaps some of these games are lighter in nature or more straightforward, but I still wanted to talk about them and my quick thoughts on them so you have an idea of where I stand. First is MLEM Space Agency. This is a new Reiner Knizia game that takes push your luck and dice rolling and adds a theme of cats traveling through space. I won't get into all the rules for any of these games. Hopefully you have an idea of what these games play like if you want a rules overview. I know there's content out there to get into, but as a quick overview, I will mention a few highlights as I go through. But for me, and as far as game comparisons go, this is very reminiscent to Can't Stop and other push-your-luck games that involve dice, but with the nuances of losing dice as you venture ahead on the board, symbolizing running out of fuel, right? And so you are all, and you also choose a asymmetric cat that has a specific power to put onto the ship every time, and it launches from the same spot, like Earth, right? And as you move along and roll your dice, you roll them, and you choose which dice you are able to use based off of where you are on the map and how many dice you want to use. And the more dice you use, the less dice you have to continue on afterwards. And so I feel like that symbolizes the running out of fuel kind of thematic tie-in here. And so in and of itself, I think the design is good, but the board game arena implementation where I played this, at least on a mobile device, is really glitchy and downright unplayable, with the auto scroll feature making the experience very glitchy and having to get yourself out of the game and back into it just to take your next turn. And so the experience was not very good, unfortunately, on Board Game Arena. And I looked into the bug situation, and I think people have mentioned this to the developer, and hopefully that is reconciled soon. But aside from that, it's a fun enough game. I think I prefer the elegance and simplicity of Can't Stop. I think that serves to be a little bit more of a raucous experience when it comes to push your luck when I've played it with others versus the experience that I get in MLEM, but it's still a pretty game to look at, and if you really enjoy push your luck games, I think this is a fun one to try, at least on the computer, and perhaps not on your phone if you're playing on Board Game Arena. Next is River City Glassworks. This is a recent Kickstarter game designed by Adam Hill, Ben Pinchback, and Matt Riddle from All Play Games, where you draft colored tiles of different shapes from a river, stacking these tiles into your own tableau into rows on your player board, and scoring the top two highest stacks when it reaches the very top, and you add those two sums, or you sum up those two scores, and that's your end game score. I can see this game being pretty fun and family weight, akin to games like Century Spice Road, Loco Momo, Living Forest, and even Azul. And I enjoy all of these other titles more, though, than River City Glassworks, because I feel like the aspect of sorting out these shapes instead of just primarily by color was a little difficult to do on Board Game Arena. Once again, this was primarily done on Board Game Arena. The icons that are listed on each section of the river where and you get to place these tokens from your hand out onto the river based off of the shape of them rather than the color. Some of the shapes were very similar to each other, and so at first it was really difficult to parse out where you might be able to play it, but once you kind of get an idea of what the different shapes are, as well as the colors and the different rarities that they have there, which is nice, I think it starts to come together pretty well, and it's probably easier in person, but still, because of the difficulty of some of the iconography, I wish it was a little bit bigger, or at least the shapes were less similar to one another, even though I guess it thematically makes sense that these shapes would be, you're usually not seeing triangular and square circle pieces, float by from glass in a river. But so that kind of held me back from really enjoying this game for what it is. Next is Orion Duel. This is a 2023 game designed by Alberto Branciari and Andrea Mainini, and it's an abstract game of putting down tiles of two different colors, blue and orange, and placing them by predetermined shapes that are legal in this game. Some of them are like 2 pieces long, or 3 or 4, that you can put down onto your map, and the goal is to try to connect different sides of this kind of hexagonal board together to win the game. But that's only one victory condition. You can also connect different galaxy icons, place tiles over them, and connect them using the same color. If you do so yourself, then you win. If you also force your opponent to connect 4 black holes together, then they lose and you win. And so this is a fun abstract game for those who are a fan of abstract games. I played this with my father-in-law, who wanted to try it out, and we had a good time with it. And I'm not particularly one who goes into pure abstract games, but I like the fact that this game has multiple routes to victory, very akin to games like Seven Wonders Duel, where if you feel like you can't win in a certain area, you can push to try to win in a different way. So that was enjoyable. Next is Cacao. This game is by Phil Walker Harding, and I played this in preparation for the top 10 farming video that I did not too long ago. I determined that it was not the best farming-themed game, or at least represented the farming theme the best, but it was a fun tile layer where you're trying to connect different types of tiles like cacao trees, or markets, or temples, etc., and slot them in adjacent to other tiles that show different numbers of workers. Therefore, you try to plan ahead and place these tokens in between these worker tiles so you can activate them and become, efficient at doing so. And it really reminded me of Applejack, having played it so much this last month, where you're trying to not only just match hives based off of their number and location, but trying to place a hexagonal tile down and match as many open hives as you can to really increase the amount of honey that you can use for income and ultimately for points. And so I got similar vibes of that mechanism seen here in Cacao. It does feel a little bit more random since you are drawing primarily from a top deck of tiles to place on, and so it's more reactionary than forward-thinking than I think Applejack is, but it was still a fun game. Even though it wasn't quite the farming game that I thought it was still fun to finally play this for the first time. I played Daybreak with Jacob, actually. This is a Matt Leacock game that I played on Board Game Arena, all about trying to prevent fossil fuels from inflicting its negative effects on the world and trying to find green solutions to it and working together as a globe to do so. And it's got all the elements of Pandemic as a cooperative game, a lot of the similar elements that Pandemic offers, where the game itself ramps up in difficulty as you move along, the cooperation of different cards that you have in your hand as well. And the interesting thing about this game is that the turn structure, unlike in Pandemic, where it is my turn and then your turn and then someone else's turn and goes around in a circle, it's very much more flexible and free-flowing, where everyone can discuss what they want to do. You can play things in different orders. You can play cards from your hand and activate different cards at any time, whether it's before or after someone else activates theirs. You're all contributing to different global projects and tucking cards to do so and preventing crises from happening. And you have multiple different objectives of what you're trying to meet, trying to enrich the environment or reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are represented from your own player tableau, which is your country, etc. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can arrive at the endgame victory and preventing a big crisis from happening. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate the flexibility and the thematic integration as well. A lot of these cards have QR codes that you can scan, and it links to the real-world solutions or strategies that we as a people are trying to implement to battle the negative effects of fossil fuels. And that was a really neat tie-in and a great learning moment in addition to learning the game. Now, I played this on Board Game Arena, again, and this game I think really shines, as I feel Pandemic does as well, on the table rather than online, unless you are playing in real time. Because we played this asynchronously, and it was really difficult to plan out the optimal strategies of when to play cards from our hand, when to activate stuff on our tableau without having that direct communication and live communication. And so I think we would have fared a lot better if we had done so, but it was really fun to at least experience what this game has to offer. It's been on my radar for a while, and so I really enjoyed my play of Daybreak and would love to play this game again in a real-time setting, whether it's online or on the table. I got to also play Dog Park with Jacob. This is a 2022 game by Lottie and Jack Hazel that has you drafting dogs and walking them through a park, picking up resources as you go along, and trying to fulfill objectives for points at the end of 4 rounds. So mechanically, it has it has kind of 2 different phases going on. You have a bidding phase where you're bidding your own victory points for dogs, and if you collect a certain amount of dogs, there are different criteria for which dogs are going to be worth more points at the end of the game. Then you have that going on with the bidding action. And then in the phase where you are moving along a track, it is very reminiscent of parks, where you can advance as far as you want, but you can't go back. And so it's all about the efficiency of knowing what your dogs need, and you have to pay these resources that you pick up along these tracks to bring your dogs back into the walking scene and have them activate again. And so it's all about that planning and timing of going on that resource track and then smartly, bidding for future dogs to add to your kennel, essentially. And so mechanically, it brings all those together. I'm not the biggest fan, though, of parks because of that mechanism. It doesn't really hit home for me. But otherwise, it was a fun game. I think it's a really neat theme, and for those who really enjoy dogs and want to play something a little bit more complex, I think, than, say, Dog Lover, I think this is the next step for you. I played Eminent Domain with Jacob. This is a game by Seth Jaffe from way back in 2011 where you're taking turns, taking actions to take over and colonize worlds, produce resources, and then sell them for points, all via cards. And so this is strictly a card game that has you doing all of these. If that sounds familiar to Race for the Galaxy, then you're correct. It is very similar to that. There are some nuances that make this game stand out. Even though this game offers a way for someone to take an action and for you to follow by spending cards from your hand to take as many action points of a certain type of action after someone else chooses it. You're drafting cards back into your hand and discarding them. And so I feel like in some, there is more of a deck building element to Eminent Domain than there is, say, in Race for the Galaxy, where you are taking cards into your hand, culling some of them, hopefully, being able to trash them as you go along to create more of an efficient deck, where I feel like in Race for the Galaxy, it's all about collecting as many cards as you can, having more options to play certain routes, down to your victory, and having that deck being recycled over and over again. It doesn't feel like a deck builder as the modern take on deck building is as it is today. And so other than that, there are very little differences between the two. I feel like there's a lot of similarity, and I think I would rather play Race for the Galaxy. I think it has obviously a lot more support than Eminent Domain has had in the past with expansions and things like that, and so that intrigues me more. And I think the gameplay is just a little bit smoother in Race for the Galaxy than it is in Eminent Domain. But if you really enjoy the theme of space and like it is in Race for the Galaxy, and you want to experience something a little bit different, then you can try out Eminent Domain on Board Game Arena. And speaking of which, I also got to play Jump Drive. I played this on Board Game Arena. This title is the beginner's version of Race for the Galaxy, where over 7 rounds you draw and play cards, hoping to combo them in a very similar fashion as you would in Race for the Galaxy to get points. A lot of the mechanisms and things that you can do are streamlined or cut out from this version of the game, and so it's a great primer to teach people how to think about Race for the Galaxy. And I think if I were a bigger fan, and I'm a fan of Race for the Galaxy, but I think if I were more invested into the game itself, I think I would be more interested in playing Jump Drive as well, just to have kind of that offshoot, easier experience, or faster experience rather. Very similar to, say, someone who really enjoys Agricola and wants to play Agricola, all creatures great and small. And so to me, if I were more invested like I am with Agricola, I think I would enjoy Jump Drive more. But it was fun to at least try that out and say that I've experienced it. I got to play Nimalia. This game is by William Levin. This game is from last year, 2023, and is a tile layer where you can overbuild your little habitat that you are producing with different types of habitats as well as animals on them, fulfilling changing objectives through the rounds that are, you have like objectives A through E or D, if I remember correctly, and in round 1 you're scoring A and B, round 2 B and C, etc. And so they're always changing, and you can alter your strategies based off of those objectives by overbuilding your tableau in a very similar fashion to a lot of Ryan Courtney games like Trailblazer and Pipeline, and also Acropolis as well, with the, I guess, objective scheme of fulfilling ever-changing objectives like you would find in Isle of Skye. And so I liked the compilation of different mechanisms here. This was fun to play. I think this would go really well with casual gamer friends that I have, and especially if you enjoy nature and things like that. I think I would rather play games like Cascadia. I think it's a little bit more thinky and more strategic in nature than Nimalia is, but it's still a solid, fun game. Finally, I got to play Tikal. Now, this is an old classic Kiesling and Kremer game from 1999, and at the time of this recording, this was on alpha on Board Game Arena. This is where I experienced it for the first time. It uses an action point system where you get 10 action points per turn to essentially travel across a tile-laden map. You're laying a tile down every single turn to build this map of this jungle where you're exploring different temples and different treasure sites and etc. And the goal is to score points by having a majority of your folks around or on a temple that you continue to build on using action points to thematically uncover them and have a larger scoring point there, as well as collecting sets of treasure icons as well. And you have intermittent scoring with volcano tiles, which are impassable, etc. This is a classic game that perhaps you may have heard of, and I've been wanting to try it. I know there was an app version of it. I think it's still there on mobile devices, but I'm glad that I had the chance to do so. It was refreshing. I guess not refreshing, but it was fun to come back to a game that utilizes an action point system where, say, moving a pawn from one space to another is one action point, where uncovering a treasure tile is 2 action points, or, so it kind of follows that same trend, and it's very reminiscent. I guess it might have been the influence for other games like Through the Ages, where I experienced the concept of action points on your turn first. And it's interesting because a lot of games nowadays are quick and snappy. You do one thing on your turn and you move on, whereas some of these older games you have a longer downtime for other players, but on your own turn you are thinking of the best combination and order of actions that you can take in order to build this bombastic turn, and you have the probability of having bombastic turns every single turn. And so that was really fun. I think it really works well in an asynchronous format, which is why I think Through the Ages works so well on the app. It's also a well-developed app, and I think Tikal will find some success on Board Game Arena, not only because of its pedigree and for what kind of the foundational work that it's set in modern board game history, but now that you can play it asynchronously, it's just easier to map out your turns and become more efficient with them without the negative aspect of other players having to wait around for your turn to culminate. So I really enjoyed that and hope to experience that in the future. So those are my reviews, quick reviews of these games. Thank you for sticking around with me and consulting with me on these reviews for March 2024. Hope you schedule an appointment with me real soon, and take care.